a bottle of perfume, a single glove, and the echo of a woman's final breath. In a city where pride can be deadlier than poison, one scent lingered longer than the truth. Behind the locked doors of a brownstone on West 35th, the great mind stirred, and the hunt for a murderer began, not with a clue, but with a question. Before we begin, I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you right now. Let me know in the comments. Settle in, because this mystery begins now. It was 10 minutes past 2 when the doorbell rang, which meant I had just enough time to finish my coffee before Wolfe started grumbling about interruptions. When I opened the front door, I found a freckle-faced delivery boy holding an envelope as if it might explode. "Delivery for Mr. Nero Wolfe," he said, nose wrinkling like he was allergic to the paper. I took the envelope, tipped him, and closed the door. It was thick ivory stock, hand-addressed in a neat, slanted script, sealed with lavender-coloured wax and, worse, perfumed. Something floral, something expensive, something I already knew Wolfe would hate. I gave it a skeptical once-over, brought it into the office, and dropped it like a dead mouse onto Wolfe's blotter. He was halfway through his afternoon beer and didn't glance up. "You've got a letter," I said. "Smells like someone tried to hide a corpse with flowers." He turned one eye toward it, and then both nostrils flared. That's how I knew the day was about to get interesting. "If that contains scented stationery, Archie, you may consider the sender already beneath contempt." "You'll want to read it anyway," I said, heading back toward the red chair. "Unless, of course, you'd prefer I handle this solo." That got him. Wolfe picked it up with a thumb and forefinger like it had just crawled out of a pond. He cracked the seal and began to read, and the longer he read, the less he blinked. Wolfe lowered the letter slowly and exhaled through his nose, a gesture that meant he was doing his best not to rant. I've seen him stay calmer in the face of homicide than in the face of synthetic lilac. "This is an abomination," he said, eyes narrowed. "Scented correspondence is vulgar. Only the insecure and the indiscreet disguise their words in fragrance." "And yet," I said, "you're still reading it." He frowned. "Unfortunately, the content is not as dismissible as the delivery." I waited. Wolfe never summarized until he'd decided how important a thing was, which meant if he told me anything at all, it was going to matter. "She claims to be Celeste Odell." I raised a brow. Name's not ringing any bells. "She owns a perfume atelier on Madison. Minor renown. But more interestingly, she hints that someone is attempting to blackmail her over an incident related to her work during the war." "Which war?" I asked. "I've lost track." He ignored me. "She has requested a consultation today at 4. She's cutting it close. She apologizes for the short notice." He dropped the letter back on the desk like it had gone rancid, which, in light of its perfume, is generous. I picked the letter back up. "Celeste Odell," I read aloud, slowly, like I was auditioning for a spelling bee. "Rings a faint chime now." "She was involved in a government contract during the war," Wolfe said, pouring himself the remainder of his beer. "Something to do with aromatic compounds for battlefield use. Camouflage, distraction, psychological manipulation. I recall reading about her in a trade journal." "Classified perfume?" I asked. "Now that's what I call secret weaponry." "She had talent," Wolfe admitted, "and discretion, until now." The letter didn't give much. No name, no detail on the blackmailer. Just a hint of panic beneath the politeness, and a postscript promising full disclosure upon meeting. She'd signed it with a flourish. "She wants to talk here at 4, I said. "And if she shows up bathed in that stuff, you'll last 10 minutes. "She will not be admitted with the perfume," Wolfe replied. "You'll intercept her, direct her to remove it if necessary. If she refuses, send her away. Customer service at its warmest." He closed his eyes. "If she is what she claims, Archie, then perfume is not her only danger." For once, I didn't have a comeback. Something about the letter itched. It wasn't just the smell. At 3:15, I decided to confirm we were still expecting company. I dialed the number on her letterhead, a boutique studio downtown, the kind that sells fragrance by the ounce and silence by the attitude. A woman answered on the third ring, voice crisp. Atelier Odell. Archie Goodwin calling. Is Miss Odell available? A pause, followed by something close to confusion. She hasn't returned since yesterday. Are you a relative? No. She had an appointment with Mr. Nero Wolfe at 4 today. I was checking to make sure she was still planning to come. Another pause, longer. She didn't mention anything to me. Her purse is here, and her dog's at the back, still waiting for dinner. That didn't sit right. I thanked her and hung up. Wolfe was still in the office with his orchids. I walked in and said, "Change of plans. Celeste might be skipping her perfume consultation." He didn't open his eyes. "Explain." "She never came home last night. Her assistant sounds worried." Wolfe opened his eyes now. "Then either she's been delayed by accident or by intent." He reached for another bottle of beer. "You will inform Fritz we may be late for dinner." Because I now believe Miss Odell is in trouble, and I detest being summoned to a mystery by way of cologne. Before I could head for my coat, the doorbell rang again. This time, it wasn't a delivery boy. It was Inspector Kramer, in his usual mood. 1 click above thunderstorm, 2 clicks below riot squad. His cigar was already half smoked and twice as bitter. "Goodwin," he grunted. "Your boss in?" "Depends. If it's personal, he's bathing. If it's professional, he's contemplating orchids. You'll need to be more specific." He pushed past me without answering. I followed him into the office, where Wolfe was already straightening in his chair. Kramer held up a plastic evidence bag containing, surprise, an envelope. Lavender wax seal, familiar script. "Recognize this?" Wolfe didn't move. "I do." "She was supposed to meet you." "She was." "Well, she's not going to. We found her car abandoned by the Hudson. Driver's side door open, purse missing, keys still in the ignition." Wolfe raised an eyebrow. "Suicide?" Kramer shrugged. "Could be. But the letter suggests otherwise." I spoke up. "You got the same one we did." "Close enough. Hers was addressed to us, asking for protection. Claimed someone from her wartime past was threatening her. She didn't give details, just perfume and panic." Wolfe's fingers tapped the desk. "Inspector, I strongly suggest you consider this not a disappearance, but a crime." Kramer narrowed his eyes. "You suggesting I don't know my job?" "No," Wolfe said. "Only that in this case, your job will get messier." He turned to me. "Archie, the perfume." I nodded. "Already ahead of you." I made 2 calls. One to Saul Panzer to keep an ear to the ground, and one to a man named Ferrante, who ran a niche scent shop in Soho. Ferrante had a memory like a bloodhound and a nose to match. "Describe it," he said over the phone. "Floral, lilac-based, strong, almost metallic undertone, definitely niche." "Lilac, huh? Not many do that anymore. Any fixative smell? Ambergris, aldehyde?" "Couldn't say. I only sniffed the envelope, not the crime scene." He made a humming noise. "If it's what I think, that blend hasn't been made in 20 years. Discontinued. Too many banned compounds. Toxic in the wrong quantity." "Toxic?" "Let's just say you wouldn't want it in a closed room." I hung up and walked back into the office. Wolfe glanced at me over the rim of his glass. "Well, it's a perfume that shouldn't exist. Blacklisted after the war. But it's back, and it just made someone vanish." Wolfe steepled his fingers. "Then we are not chasing a blackmailer. We are chasing a ghost with access to the past." And for the first time since the letter arrived, he didn't complain about the scent. The thing about Inspector Kramer is, he never knocks when he's got steam coming out of his ears. He just barges in like he's still chasing somebody through a speakeasy, and the doorknob's on parole. That particular afternoon, the doorknob barely survived. The office door swung open like it had been kicked by a boot with a badge behind it, and there he stood. Lieutenant of Homicide, cigar clenched, forehead creased, and waving an envelope like it had cheated on him. "Where is he?" he barked. "If you mean Nero Wolfe," I said, lounging in the red chair with a glass of cold milk. "He's digesting trout and scowling at the weather. Get him. He charges extra for stormy guests." "I'm not a guest." "You're right. You never stay long enough." That earned me a glare and a shove past the globe. I called down the hall and, 5 minutes later, Wolfe made his entrance with the glacial dignity of a man who'd just been interrupted while reading Horace. Kramer didn't wait. He slapped the perfumed envelope on Wolfe's desk like it was Exhibit A. "You knew she was in trouble. You let her disappear." Wolfe blinked slowly. "That's an impressive syllogism. Entirely wrong, but vigorous." "She sent you this." "Yes," Wolfe said, lowering himself into his chair. "And your assumption that receiving a letter implicates me in the sender's misfortune suggests your detective work today is of a more creative variety." Kramer puffed harder. "You're playing this your way. I know it." Wolfe sighed. "Mr. Kramer, if I were playing it my way, I would not be enduring your odor while finishing my beer. And that's when I knew things were just getting warm. If there's a particular pleasure Wolfe enjoys more than a good glass of beer, it's watching Kramer blunder into his office armed with half-formed theories and full-throttle irritation." Wolfe leaned back, fingers pressed together in that smug little steeple he uses when he's sharpening a verbal knife. "She sent you this letter," Kramer said again, stabbing at the envelope. "You didn't tell anyone." "It was addressed to me," Wolfe replied, "and delivered in a sealed envelope, not broadcast on a sandwich board. She said she feared for her life." "She implied uncertainty and concern," Wolfe corrected. "There was no demand for immediate rescue. Her appointment was scheduled for 4. She failed to arrive. You have informed me her car was found abandoned. If you intend to blame me for not anticipating that sequence, I suggest you submit a formal accusation so I may file it directly in the wastebasket." Kramer made a noise somewhere between a growl and a laugh. Always the smart mouth. "Intellect is not a mouth, Mr. Kramer. It is what distinguishes deliberate action from brute reaction. I've got 4 missing persons cases this month. Don't make me add you to the stack." "You couldn't lift me," Wolfe muttered, and took a long sip of his beer. I bit my cheek to keep from grinning. Kramer looked ready to throttle something. Instead, he turned and left, door slamming like it owed him money. Wolfe dabbed his lips with a napkin. That man must have ulcers in his hatband. The call came 20 minutes later, while I was pretending to reorganize the mail pile. The voice on the other end didn't bother with niceties. "This Goodwin?" "Speaking." "This is Edward Odell, Celeste's brother." I stood straighter. "Go on." "You and your boss were supposed to meet with her yesterday. She didn't show." "We noticed." His voice was clipped, cold, but humming with the kind of barely leashed energy that makes a man either a surgeon or a gunman. "She was scared," he said. "Wouldn't say what about, but I knew it. You're going to find out who did this to her." "Did what? We still don't know if—" "She didn't kill herself, and she sure as hell didn't run off. Celeste was exacting, paranoid, and punctual. You'll find her, and you'll make them pay." There was a pause. I didn't say anything. "You tell Wolfe," he continued, "that if he doesn't take this case, I'll walk into the press room at the Gazette and start naming names, starting with his." "Not a great negotiation tactic," I said. "I'm not negotiating. I'm hiring." He hung up. I walked into the office and found Wolfe mid-page in Pliny the Elder. "That was Edward Odell," I said, "brother of the perfumed lady." I assumed. "He wants to hire you." "Wants. Demands." Wolfe grunted. "Impertinent. Also persuasive." "I doubt that." I dropped the receiver back in its cradle. "He threatened to go public." That got him. He closed the book. "Call him back," Wolfe said. Tell him I accept, conditionally. The official retainer arrived 20 minutes later via telegram, $5,000 wired from Odell's business account, and a note stating, in brief, that we'd better be worth it. I showed it to Wolfe. He's rude, Wolfe muttered. He's rich, I replied. You'll manage. Wolfe sniffed. Very well, we are now employed. You may inform Mr. Odell that I expect full access to his sister's boutique, her files, and anyone she corresponded with in the last 6 months. He might not play nice. I do not require nice. I require results. He folded the telegram and tapped it against his palm like a judge's gavel. This case, he said, offends me. Not morally, Archie, intellectually. A woman of discretion and intelligence sends a perfumed letter to summon aid, then vanishes before the appointed hour. That is not accident. That is architecture. Sounds like you're starting to enjoy this. I rarely enjoy the absence of facts, but I do enjoy dismantling a puzzle that's been arrogantly constructed. He leaned back. We are not rescuing a damsel, Archie. We are countering an insult. That's the closest Wolfe ever comes to getting emotional. And that's when I knew we were going all in. Wolfe sat behind his desk like a judge waiting to issue a death sentence. Except in this case, the condemned was me. And the crime was body odor, specifically someone else's. You will trace the origin of that scent, he said, gesturing toward the lavender-sick envelope like it was contaminated. Find out who made it, where, when, and how it returned to circulation. Certainly, I said, reaching for my notebook. Would you also like me to solve the economy while I'm out? He gave me a look that suggested sarcasm was a misdemeanor punishable by exile. I suggest, he said, you begin with Luigi Ferrante. That changed my expression. Ferrante had a nose like a bloodhound and the temperament of a basil plant, moody if left unattended too long. Still, if anyone could ID a ghost perfume from a 6-second sniff, it was Luigi. Take the envelope, but do not allow him to keep it. God forbid. And do not, under any circumstance, attempt to describe the fragrance yourself. You are not qualified. That last bit stung a little, but I took it on the chin. I slipped the envelope into a plastic sleeve, grabbed my coat, and headed downtown to sniff out the past. Luigi Ferrante's shop was sandwiched between a failing art gallery and a coffee joint that only sold espresso in demitasse cups, which is a fancy way of saying they charged extra for less. The sign above his door read, Ferrante Fragrances, in faded gold leaf, and the interior smelled like ambition steeped in citrus oil. Ferrante himself looked like the love child of a violinist and a monk. Short, balding, neatly dressed, with a voice that belonged in a string quartet and hands that never stopped moving. You brought me something, he said before I even reached the counter. Don't you want to know what it is? No, I want to know what it smells like. I produced the envelope and held it out. He didn't touch it, just leaned forward and inhaled through his nostrils like a man evaluating a crime scene. Lilac. Real lilac, not synthetic. Green top note. Aldehydic trail. Strange. Strange good or strange lethal? Strange forgotten. He glanced at me sharply. Where did you get this? Client received it, then vanished. He shook his head. Not sold retail. Not since maybe 1949. Sure about that? He nodded, already turning to his shelves. It's a wartime composition. Government-restricted formula, then discontinued. Too volatile, too unique, and too valuable. And now it's back? Ferrante gave me a look that curled my spine. If this scent has returned, he said quietly, someone went to great lengths to dig up something that was buried for a reason. I pressed for details, and Ferrante, to his credit, gave them. The original formula, he said, contained a fixative compound derived from civet and a stabilizer classified after the war. Rumor was it had psychological applications, designed to induce calm or confusion depending on exposure. Used in interrogation rooms. Used in anything where the human mind could be nudged. No one knows for sure. After 47, the base compound was banned outright. The rest of the formula followed. He looked down at the envelope again, this time not with curiosity, but reverence. Someone revived it, I said, or someone never stopped making it. I left with a sick feeling that had nothing to do with the perfume. Back on the street, the air felt too clean. The problem wasn't that the scent had returned. It was that it had never really disappeared, and the trail we were sniffing had just gotten darker. Midtown Manhattan doesn't have a smell. It has a sequence of them. First the cab exhaust, then the burnt pretzel cart, then the perfume counters. If you don't believe me, walk 3 blocks of Madison at lunchtime with your eyes closed and count how many fragrances hit you before you get hit by a pedestrian. My first stop was the usual collection of high-end fragrance boutiques where salespeople were either bored stiff or hostile with polish. I got the full rundown. No lilac blend like the one Ferrante described, no wartime throwback formulas, and definitely no idea who might be circulating outlaw chemistry in Midtown. Most of them tried to sell me something anyway. Perhaps your wife. I'm not married. Your mother. She prefers Scotch. I kept moving until I found Atelier Odell, smaller than I expected. Elegant white tile floors, brass fixtures, and not a single scent in the air unless you opened a vial. There was a woman at the counter. She looked up as I entered, and if the name hadn't already given it away, the accent would have done the job in 2 syllables. "Good afternoon," she said, voice soft, eyes direct. "You must be from Mr. Wolfe." That was my cue to start asking questions. Yvette Dulac was tall for a woman who worked behind glass counters. Platinum hair, red nails, and a faint scent of something dry and smoky that probably cost more than Fritz's grocery budget for the week. She wore a white lab coat, unbuttoned just enough to suggest it had never been used for actual science. "You are Archie Goodwin?" she asked. "In the flesh." "I have read of you. Mr. Wolfe's assistant, with a certain reputation." I didn't ask what kind. I already knew it wasn't for my gardening. I introduced myself, showed her Wolfe's card, and told her we were looking into Celeste's disappearance on behalf of her brother. That earned me a cool nod and a flicker of something behind her eyes. Maybe sadness, maybe calculation. It's hard to tell with professionals. "She was my employer," Yvette said. "But more than that, she was my mentor, a genius." I let that hang for a moment before asking, "Do you know if she'd been acting nervous lately? Out of sorts?" Yvette hesitated. She had been preoccupied, concerned. With? I do not know. She would lock herself in the formulation room for hours. One day she asked if I believed in ghosts. "Did you?" She gave me a sly little smile. Not until she vanished. I made a note of that. Was she expecting anyone the day she disappeared? No. Only you. Then she blinked once, slowly, like she had more to say, but didn't. So I asked, "Was anyone angry with her?" "Not until now," she said. I followed her into the back room, where the real work happened. Beakers, pipettes, centrifuges, and bottles with names like Jasmine Absolute and Oud Elixir. If Wolfe ever walked in there, he'd either faint or demand ownership. "She told me," Yvette said, "that someone from her past had returned." "Who?" "She didn't say, only that she recognized the scent." I looked at her. "You mean the perfume?" "Yes. She said it came from a life she had tried to leave behind." That wasn't vague. That was cryptic on purpose. I sniffed the air again, but whatever Celeste had been cooking up wasn't left behind. "Did she seem frightened?" Yvette's fingers traced a small amber vial on the counter. She did not frighten easily, but yes, there was something in her eyes. I asked if she wanted me to call her brother. She said no. Why not? She didn't trust him. That was news. Is there anyone else who might have known what she was working on? No, Yvette said. It was always just the two of us. And you never opened one of those locked drawers. She smiled again. Monsieur Goodwin, I may be French, but I am not suicidal. I couldn't argue with that. I left the boutique with Yvette's smile stuck in my brain and headed across town to a brownstone even, older than Wolfe's, home of Gianni Broglia. He answered the door himself, thin, wrinkled, eyes like polished obsidian. He smelled faintly of bergamot and bitterness. You are not a bill collector, he said. No, sir. Then come in. The inside was cramped, dusty, and lined with shelves that held more bottles than a bootlegger's funeral. I told him who I was and why I'd come. At the name Celeste Odell, he closed his eyes for 3 full seconds. She was brilliant, he said, and she was dangerous. Dangerous how? He waved a hand. Not with a gun, with her mind. During the war, she helped formulate something for the government. A compound, aromatic, psychological, subtle. We never saw the final results. Why? Because it disappeared. Like her. He didn't smile. She came to me once, after the war, asked if I remembered the lilac distortion. That's what she called it. I told her yes. She said someone was trying to revive it. I leaned forward. Did she tell you who? He shook his head. No, but I warned her. Some things should stay forgotten. I didn't argue. The air in his house smelled like memories you couldn't wash off. Gianni Broglia didn't pace, which was one of the things I liked about him. He simply poured 2 fingers of brandy for himself, offered me none, and settled into the corner of his moth-eaten armchair like a relic returned to its pedestal. She was brought into the program late, he said, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. They needed someone with olfactory skill, but also artistic intuition. That was Celeste. This was a government contract? Naturally. You think civilians would have wasted their time distilling fear into a scent bottle? Depends on the civilians, I muttered. He didn't laugh. The formula had no name at first. Later, it was codenamed Narcisse 9. It was meant to be used in the field. Subtle. Not a stink bomb. Something elegant. Smuggled into places no one could trace. Perfume laced with chemical agents. The scent would trigger emotional reactions. Unease, vulnerability, confusion. Sounds charming. It was never used as far as I know. They buried it. Too unstable. And it relied on a compound that aged poorly. Became toxic. And now someone's unburied it. He didn't answer that. Just swirled his brandy. I told her, he murmured, to let it go. She laughed. Said the past doesn't stay buried. It just marinates. I wrote that one down. It sounded like something Wolfe would quote while watering orchids. She was scared, Mr. Goodwin, he added. And Celeste Odell didn't scare easy. That made 2 of us. By the time I left Broglia's brownstone, the light outside had turned the colour of cheap whiskey, and I was itching to pass this one along. I called the house from a payphone near Lexington. Fritz answered. He's in the plant room, Mr. Goodwin. Drag him out, I said. Tell him I've got ghosts and government secrets. 10 minutes later, Wolfe picked up with the patience of a man rudely summoned from communion with an orchid. I gave him the gist, classified formulas, emotional warfare by scent, and one very dead compound that had no business being resurrected. He grunted once, which meant he was impressed. Your opinion? I think someone's using the old formula to hide a murder behind nostalgia. There's precedent. Also, I added, Yvette Dulac says Celeste didn't trust her brother. Of course not, Wolfe replied. She trusted no one. That's why she's dead. Before I could ask what he meant, he hung up. I was at my desk the next morning with a cup of coffee and the pleasant delusion that I might get an hour of peace when Saul Panzer called. Broglia's dead, he said. Police just broke the door. My coffee didn't even have the decency to spill. I got over there fast. Too fast for Wolfe's liking, but just fast enough to beat the chalk outlines. Gianni was face down on the floor of his sitting room. His brandy glass was unbroken, sitting neatly on the armrest. The window was closed, door locked from the inside. No forced entry. The only thing out of place was the shattered bottle beside him, the one with the lilac scent. A faint floral musk still hung in the room. Familiar now, and a little too sweet for death. Kramer was already there, grumbling and waving off the coroner. He fell, Kramer said. Old man, bad balance, hit his head. I pointed to the broken bottle. He kept that formula buried for decades. Then he talks to me and ends up dead next to the thing he warned me about. Kramer didn't blink. Coincidence? And the lilac perfume. Coincidental too. Maybe he was. Nostalgic. Sure. So nostalgic he poisoned himself. Kramer didn't answer. I left him muttering and walked out into the sharp air. One thing was now perfectly clear. Someone wanted Narcisse 9 to stay buried, and they were willing to kill for it. I had just served Wolfe his sherry, and he had just informed me for the 4th time that I was pouring it incorrectly, when the front door banged open like a jealous husband had returned early. Seconds later, Inspector Kramer burst into the office, trailing a cigar cloud that could have qualified for its own weather pattern. Don't bother to stand, he growled. I never do, Wolfe replied, not rising. Kramer tossed a folded paper onto Wolfe's desk. Broglier's dead. And before you say a word, no, it wasn't murder. Guy was 78, half blind and clumsy. Wolfe lifted the paper with 2 fingers and skimmed it. This is the preliminary incident report. That's right. Cause of death. Head trauma from a fall. He knocked over a bottle, opened it, probably fainted, landed on the floor and never got up. Wolfe sniffed. An accidental overdose by lilac. Old men die all the time. Wolfe turned his head a fraction, which in his universe of gestures was a full somersault. The timing is exquisitely convenient. Kramer puffed. You're looking for ghosts. On the contrary, Wolfe said, sipping. I'm looking for a living person with intimate knowledge of banned chemical compounds. Kramer squinted at him. You're not buying it. If gravity killed Mr. Broglier, Wolfe said, then gravity is now in possession of a criminal record. Kramer didn't laugh. He just left. The moment Kramer's footsteps faded down the stairs, Wolfe let out a low groan, the sound of intellect insulted by authority. Archie, he said, summon Mr. Panzer. I lifted an eyebrow. You want Saul before dinner? This must be serious. Quite. He reached for another sherry. The inspector has the gall to stand in this room and posit that a man who handled volatile compounds for 5 decades was undone by poor balance. People trip, Wolfe. Children trip. Broglier was careful, habitually careful. His accident is too timely, too staged. I picked up the phone and dialed Saul's number. Want him to break into the morgue too? Wolfe scowled. Nothing illegal. He will obtain the full autopsy and toxicology report through channels. If we must expose the murderer's sophistication, we'll need evidence more credible than Mr. Kramer's resignation to physics. I hung up after getting Saul's promise. He says he'll have it within the hour. Excellent. Wolfe lifted his glass again. You may inform Fritz that dinner will be slightly delayed. I refuse to dine in the company of willful ignorance. I didn't bother telling Fritz. I figured he already knew. The orchids weren't the only thing in that house sensitive to irritation. By the time Saul returned, the dining room table was set. Wolfe was still pouting into his glass, and Fritz had resorted to rearranging the napkins like they were pawns in a particularly tense game of linen chess. Saul didn't knock. He just came in and handed Wolfe the folder with the kind of expression that told me I'd want to read it too. Wolfe scanned the first page. His lips tightened. As I suspected. What's the verdict? I asked, getting up. Wolfe passed me the page. Ethyl bromacillide. I blinked. Say again. Saul sat. A nerve agent derivative, colorless, floral in trace amounts, potent in enclosed spaces, Outlawed in 47. Last known use was in a naval test that killed 2 officers during containment training. Lovely, I muttered. It was used, Wolfe said, as the binding component in Broglia's broken bottle. This wasn't a trip and tumble. It was a setup. Someone placed a lethal dose where he'd be most likely to inhale it. And in a bottle, he would have opened himself. Someone who knew his habits. And his past, Wolfe added. Saul nodded. Signature compound, too. Almost impossible to get these days unless you had unusual access. Wolfe turned to me. You will make a list. Anyone alive who worked with Celeste Odell on government scent formulas, domestic or otherwise. What's the heading? Suspects, Wolfe said flatly. Or if you prefer, perfumed assassins. Wolfe didn't eat much that night, which, if you know anything about his digestive priorities, is an admission of grave psychological disturbance. After dinner, he retired to the office and sat beneath the ceiling fan, fingers steepled, eyes closed. It wasn't the scent that killed Broglia, he said finally. It was the belief that it no longer existed. I looked up from the typewriter. Meaning? Meaning that whoever killed him understood his pride, his history, and his blind spots. They used his own nostalgia as a weapon. That perfume's been gone for decades. Precisely. Its very presence suggests intention, no accidental discovery. This was curated, timed. Could be Yvette. She had access, but the technical knowledge, unlikely, unless she's far better at chemistry than she lets on. What about the brother, Edward? Wolfe opened his eyes. Possible, but crude. He strikes me as the sort to break noses, not brew toxins. Then who? Wolfe didn't answer. He turned his head slightly toward the window, where the last sliver of daylight was fading. It's someone who wanted Broglia silenced and the scent erased, not to sell it, to erase its footprint. Why? He paused. Because memory is power, and someone is killing both. The next morning, Wolfe was up early, by which I mean he was dressed before 10 and drinking beer before Fritz had finished whipping the eggs. He summoned me to the office with the tone of someone who had solved at least one philosophical dilemma and was considering a second. Archie, it is no longer about who wanted Celeste dead. That field is too wide. I sat. So narrow it down. Who needed her gone? Wolfe nodded. Better, ask yourself, who needs Narcisse 9 to disappear permanently? Not for profit, for protection. I said nothing. Celeste's letter hinted at blackmail, but not to extort her. It was a signal, a warning. Someone knew she was looking into the old compound again. I leaned back. And Gianni knew the formula. Yes, he may have helped invent it, so he became the next target. Okay, but what does the killer want? Erasure. They want the entire project forgotten. No documentation, no formula, no witnesses. And what's our motive? Wolfe held up a single thick finger. Exposure. Not theft, not revenge. Whoever they are, they fear discovery. I tapped my pen. You think it's a government man? A chemist? Possibly. Or a merchant who dealt in classified compounds long after they were declassified. Perhaps someone built a fortune on the fiction that Narcisse 9 never existed. That was enough to shut me up for a full minute. Wolfe took a sip. And now the trail is narrowing, because once you kill nostalgia, you kill the last witness. I found the envelope at 6:48 a.m. I wasn't looking for it. I was looking for coffee, but it was waiting there on the vestibule table like a cat that had let itself in. Same ivory stock, same lavender wax seal, same faint floral ghost clinging to the edges. I didn't touch it right away, just stared, then sniffed. Lilac, metallic finish, almost medicinal. Whoever was behind this had consistency, at least. I brought it into the office and laid it on Wolfe's desk without a word. He entered 2 minutes later in his robe and slippers, glanced at the envelope, and gave a sound like someone had stepped on his reputation. Another one? Same seal, same scent. Delivered? Either that, or it materialized. He leaned in, sniffed once, and nodded. Identical. No note this time. Of course not. The message is implicit. Which is, Wolfe sat, that we're being watched and tested. This isn't intimidation. It's invitation. To what? A confrontation. I looked at the envelope again. Why the perfume? Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Because the killer doesn't fear detection. They fear memory. And scent is the most stubborn memory of all. I made a note to tell Kramer. Not that he'd care. Wolfe rang for breakfast, opened his newspaper, and said nothing more. But I could tell the hunt had officially begun. You'd have better luck getting the Statue of Liberty to change hats than getting Wolfe to leave the brownstone for a suspect interview. So when I returned from my morning reconnaissance and told him we had 4 potential suspects, each with motive and access, he didn't even twitch a jowl. Then interview them, he said, inspecting a leaf on one of his Vanda hybrids, as if it were about to confess. You know, I said, there's a reason most detectives don't farm out the entire legwork. Some even stand up. Wolfe grunted. My value lies not in motion, but in analysis. I pointed at the beer glass beside his elbow. And fermentation. He glanced at me. You are becoming churlish, Archie. Only on assignment. He flicked his hand like he was dismissing a bug. Interview Miss Dulac again. Then the chemist, Dr. Tibbets. After that, Durant. Then Merrow. Separate them and keep notes. You want notes in alphabetical order. Alphabetical, emotional, chronological. Use your judgment. I sighed, stood, and grabbed my coat. Should I bring them back here? No, Wolfe said. If I must smell Chanel No. 5 again, I shall require hospitalization. Fair enough. When I arrived at Atelier Odell for the second time in as many days, Yvette Dulac was reclining on a velvet settee, like a woman auditioning for grief, but unsure of her lines. A glass of something clear and not quite legal sat on the end table. Mr. Goodwin, she said, eyes a little red and a lot calculating. I wasn't expecting you. Grief is unpredictable, I replied, and so is Nero Wolfe. She smiled faintly and gestured for me to sit. I didn't. Mind if I ask where you were the night Gianni Broglia died? Her eyes widened, just a shade too dramatically. Gianni? He's dead? Face down beside a shattered bottle of vintage lilac. She stared into her drink like it held the answer. That scent. It keeps returning. Like a bad idea. I waited. I was here, she said finally. Until 10. Then I went home, alone. Any witnesses? No one that would interest you. You'd be surprised what interests me. I leaned forward. You were close to Celeste. Close enough to know what she feared. She feared the past, Yvette whispered, and the people who would profit from it. Would that include you? Her hand trembled just slightly. I don't need to profit from ghosts. Her voice was soft. Her eyes were steel. And the gin, still on her breath. I made a note, tipped my hat, and left before the performance dragged into Act 2. Dr. Leonard Tibbets lived in a 4th-floor walk-up above a laundromat that had stopped pretending to clean anything in 1992. I knocked twice. The door creaked open like it resented the intrusion. Dr. Tibbets? I asked. He nodded, a twitchy, bird-like motion. White shirt buttoned to the throat, hair combed like he'd lost a bet with static. The place smelled of mothballs and regret. I'm Archie Goodwin, working on a case involving Celeste Odell. At her name, his eyelid twitched twice. She's gone. That's why I'm here. He let me in. The room was stacked with boxes marked Lab Archives, Memos, and one ominously labeled Do Not Shred. She said someone was watching her, he mumbled. I told her she was being dramatic. I shouldn't have. What did she think they wanted? He swallowed. The formula. It wasn't just a fragrance, it was a framework, a modular compound, military applications, psychological warfare. And you helped build it. His hands fluttered. I advised. I didn't authorize its use. Who else worked on it? He hesitated. 3 others, all gone. 2 disappeared. 1 died in a fire. How comforting. She came to me last month, said someone had resurrected Narcisse 9. And you believed her? He nodded. Because I smelled it. On her coat. I stood. Dr. Tibbets, don't leave town. His laugh was dry and brittle. I haven't left this building in 6 weeks. Fair enough. Maxime Durant chose the cafe. Of course he did. It was the kind of place where the coffee arrived with a foam sculpture, and the waiters looked like disgraced violinists. He was waiting with a half smile and a cane he didn't need. French cufflinks, tan overcoat, and a cologne that could have distracted a jury. Ah, Monsieur Goodwin, do you drink espresso? I drink things that make sense, so no. He chuckled and signaled for a second cup. I understand you and Celeste had a falling out, I said. He shrugged. A lawsuit is not a falling out. It is a clarification. She stole from you? She was accused of it, and she denied it. We reached an agreement, which included what? Silence. And now she's dead. Durant's smile faded, just slightly. I did not kill her, Mr. Goodwin. I disliked her. I distrusted her. But murder? No. Where were you the night Brolier died? Here. I eat dinner alone on Wednesdays. I find company overrated. Anyone verify that? The maitre d' can vouch. I tip well. I paused. Ever heard of Narcisse 9? His eyes flicked up. Sharp. Cold. No. He was lying. It landed between us like a dropped vial. If I find out you're sitting on a formula band since 47, you'll do what? Arrest me. No. But I'll make sure Wolfe eats your alibi for lunch. He grinned again, but it didn't reach his eyes. We finished our coffee in silence. Clive Merrow's fragrance import office in Chelsea was the olfactory equivalent of a well-tailored lie, sleek, clean, and just a little too polished. The front room smelled faintly of bergamot and false modesty. The receptionist, a redhead with precision-bobbed hair and the kind of smile that files receipts in triplicate, announced me with the flourish of someone who'd spent time in finishing school and regretted it. Merrow emerged in a navy suit, no tie, crisp shirt, open at the throat. He looked like a man who had once sold secrets for a living and now preferred sandalwood. Mr. Goodwin, he said smoothly, you're here about Celeste. Word travels. I read newspapers, and I get calls. We took seats in his office, where the scent of vetiver lingered like an expensive alibi. I'm told you used to be OSS, Marseille, 1943. His eyes narrowed, but he didn't deny it. What's your point? My point is, people with covert backgrounds and complicated friends don't always turn over a new leaf. Sometimes they just press it between the pages of a different book. He smirked. And you think I killed Celeste? I think she had a secret, and secrets attract people who've kept a few of their own. He leaned forward. Celeste was afraid of what was being made behind her back. Narcisse 9 wasn't just a scent, it was leverage. Against whom? Against everyone. I left with a whiff of imported myrrh and a gut feeling that Clive Merrow was still fluent in the art of evasion, and maybe sabotage. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was up in the plant room, and Fritz served me lamb curry with a subtle kick that nearly convinced me the world made sense. Nearly. By the time Wolfe descended, beer in hand and scowl intact, I had 4 files stacked on the desk and a headache that made me consider early retirement. So, he said, lowering himself into the red leather chair, regale me. Yvette is equal parts perfume and panic. She has no verifiable alibi, a nose for drama, and a liquor cabinet that could fund a revolution. Noted. Tibbets is a trembling chemist with access, paranoia, and a trail of missing co-workers. Naturally. Durant's lying about knowing Narcisse 9, and he's got the kind of ego that strangles people for looking smarter than him. And Merrow. He's hiding something. Ex-OSS, warehouse in Queens, Probably still knows people who make problems disappear. Wolfe sipped. Excellent. Excellent. They're all guilty. Yet none of them committed the crime. I groaned. Right now, it's like a locked room where the murder weapon was a metaphor. Then we shall find the key. Or forge one. I stood. Want me to rattle Nero's warehouse? Yes. Use discretion. And a raincoat. Queens was having one of those sullen, rain-drenched nights where everything looked guilty, and even the street lamps had secrets. I parked a block from Nero's warehouse, a squat, two-story thing with rusted signage that read Sanitaire Supplies, Inc., which would have been cute if it hadn't smelled like a high-end department store's perfume aisle exploded inside. I waited in the Dodge for 40 minutes. At 9:22 p.m., Nero arrived in a tan Peugeot. No companions. He unlocked the side entrance, glanced once over his shoulder, and slipped inside. I gave it 3 minutes, then followed. The padlock was shiny, but the chain was theatre. A quiet shimmy and nudge, and I was in. The place wasn't exactly humming with activity, but it wasn't abandoned either. Rows of boxes labelled cleaning solvent, floral base lined the walls. I pried one open. The smell that hit me wasn't ammonia. It was lilac, expensive lilac, synthetic, weaponized lilac, Narcisse 9. I snapped a quick photo of the label with my pocket camera. Yes, Wolfe believes in analog evidence, and was heading for the door when I heard footsteps upstairs. Not Nero. Too light. I ducked into the shadows and waited, hand on the .38. I never admit to carrying. Someone else was sniffing around, and not for cleaning supplies. There are few things in life that make me question my career choices. One is a cold-tail job in Queens on a Tuesday night, and the other is the smell of wet cardboard when it mixes with regret. That warehouse district off 39th Avenue had both in spades. I'd been following Clive Nero since noon. He'd made 3 stops, a shipping firm in Brooklyn, a tailor on Lexington who could have been laundering silk or money, and finally, a detour to this charming slice of mildew and mystery. He parked behind a squat grey building with cracked windows and a big metal door that looked like it hadn't been painted since Roosevelt, the first one. From my spot behind a busted-up bakery van, I had a clear view of the loading dock. Nero didn't knock. He had a key, which was more than I could say for myself. He slipped in like a man who knew where the bodies weren't buried, but might have done the burying himself. The street had a scent to it, faint but persistent, like lilac left too long in the rain. Not strong enough to raise alarms, but enough to make a guy with a working nose think of Celeste's final note. I waited. 10 minutes. 15. Then, a shadow passed behind the upper floor windows. Clive wasn't just checking stock, and whatever he was checking, I had a feeling it wasn't on the company's invoice. By the time the street went silent and Clive didn't come back out, I made a judgment call, one Wolfe would label impulsive, and I'd call professional initiative. The side door had a padlock that looked ceremonial. I gave it a twist, a pop, and the dignity of silence. Inside, it was as cold and damp as a cellar in a fairy tale, and smelled about the same if Cinderella was into industrial espionage. Floor-to-ceiling crates filled the place. Grey cardboard stamped with hazardous, industrial solvent, handle with care. The lettering was crisp, but the odour was anything but. No bleach, no ammonia, no piney nonsense. Lilac. Expensive lilac. Celeste's ghost was in the air, and I hadn't even reached the top floor. I stepped carefully, aware that I was breaking the law, violating at least 3 city ordinances, and potentially walking into a trap. But it wasn't the cops or Clive Nero I was worried about. It was whatever was hiding behind that scent. The stairs creaked like they'd been coached by a melodrama director, but I made it to the top without a tumble. The second floor was worse, darker, quieter, and full of crates that had never seen a customs form. I cracked one open with my penknife. Inside were rows of bottles, wrapped in linen and arranged like they were going to a charity gala. No labels, just hand-scrawled notes taped to each one. French, some German, a few chemical codes I'd seen in Celeste's notebook. I unwrapped a sample. The scent that drifted out wasn't shy. It was her. The same fragrance that had clung to her scarf, lingered in Wolfe's nose, and haunted that damn envelope. Narcisse 9. Or whatever version of it had been brewed in this back-alley fragrance bunker. I took a deep breath, regretted it instantly, and snapped a couple of shots with the pocket camera. Wolfe didn't care for blurry descriptions. He liked his evidence with framing. As I turned to leave, the scent shifted. Something sharper now, less memory, more menace, not the perfume, something else. I wasn't alone. That old instinct tickled between my shoulder blades. I pulled out the .38 I wasn't supposed to be carrying and stepped backward, into something cold and metallic. They don't tell you in detective school, mostly because there is no detective school, that perfume vats are big enough to drown a man. This one was stainless steel, industrial-sized, and about waist-high. The surface shimmered under the flickering ceiling bulb, like a lake made of ghost tears. And floating face down in it was Edward Odell, or at least 190 pounds of him, minus what the lilac had soaked off. I stood there a beat too long, not because I'm squeamish, but because something about it struck the wrong chord. Odell was the kind of guy who'd die of a heart attack before anyone got the pleasure of murdering him. But here he was, steeped in synthetic aroma and betrayal. I scanned for signs, blunt trauma, a needle mark, anything. But the body was slick, and the room was beginning to smell like panic. The vat wasn't labelled, which was suspicious in itself. No shipping numbers, no clipboard, just a body in a bath of scent that shouldn't exist. I took one shot with the flash. The bulb flared and fizzled. Hopefully the film would catch something before the smell caught up with me. I heard a creak downstairs. Clive. No time to search further. I backed away, retraced my steps, and slipped out the same door I'd come through. Back into the rain, back into the stink of Queens. If Wolfe thought I'd enjoy finding Odell this way, he was wrong. But he'd also been right. Dead right. I found a payphone outside a deli that smelled like pickled trauma. The rain was steady, and the coins stuck in the slot like they were protesting. Wolfe picked up on the second ring. Yes? Edward Odell is dead. A pause. Not long, but enough to confirm he already suspected. Where? In a vat of unregistered perfume. Locked warehouse. Queens. Looks like the Narcisse 9 you sniffed out is real, and now it's lethal. A long breath. You are certain? He's floating in it like a mint leaf in a fancy cocktail. I shall notify Mr. Kramer. Generous of you. He'll be thrilled. This is most inconvenient. That's one way of putting it. Return immediately. One more thing, I added. There's something off about the place. Too neat for a smuggling ring, too fragrant for a detergent supply company. I shall reserve judgment. Do not dawdle. He hung up. Wolfe never says, be careful. But for once, his silence had a chill in it. By the time the sirens lit up the block, I was back at the warehouse, standing just close enough to play innocent. Kramer showed up with his usual thundercloud expression and a team that looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. You again, he said. I never left, I replied helpfully. He didn't smile. While they worked the scene, I wandered to the office near the loading dock. There was a cluttered desk, a half-eaten sandwich, and a stack of delivery forms that hadn't yet met their shredder. I flipped through. Most were boilerplate. One, however, had the official city seal and the leasing details. The property wasn't registered to Clive Merrow. Not directly. It belonged to Maxime Durant, the chemist with the nervous fingers and the voice like lukewarm tea. The man who claimed he didn't know anything about Narcisse 9. I folded the lease gently and slid it into my coat. Kramer was yelling something about chain of custody, but my mind was already 2 steps ahead. Because if Durant was bankrolling secret perfume production, and killing people to keep it quiet, then we had a bigger problem. A very fragrant, very deadly one. And Wolfe was going to love it. Almost. When a man seeks solace among plants, you usually suspect a breakup, bankruptcy, or a bad haircut. In Wolfe's case, it meant one thing. He was thinking, and thinking hard. The glass doors to the plant rooms were shut tighter than a clam with secrets. From the crack under the door seeped not just the sticky heat of the tropical climate Wolfe doted on, but also a palpable fug of irritation. I knew better than to disturb the master when he'd parked himself among the Vanda Rothschildiana. It was his version of pacing, only the orchids did the moving. I could just make out the sound of him shifting pots and muttering at a specimen like it had personally botched the case. Fritz, God bless him, brought in a fresh crate of Wolfe's imported beer every hour on the hour, like a footman offering a Roman emperor his amphora. Wolfe had said precisely 12 words since I'd reported the murder of Edward Odell and Maxime Durant's name on the warehouse lease. 6 of those words had been, "Do not speak to me, Archie." The others weren't printable in polite company. I didn't blame him. A trail of lilac perfume had led us to a warehouse full of wartime secrets, and a corpse in a vat. And unless orchids could give sworn testimony, Wolfe was going to have to come out eventually. Until then, I let the jungle stew in its own greenhouse gloom and waited for the rumble of the volcano. By the 4th hour of radio silence from Wolfe, even Fritz was eyeing me like I might start reorganizing the spice rack out of sheer boredom. I didn't. Instead, I decided to monologue. "Let's review the players, Fritz," I said, flopping into the red leather chair in the office. Yvette, our sobbing siren, may be drowning in Chanel and regret, or just gin. Tibbets, twitchier than a Geiger counter on a bad day, and hiding enough government secrets to write his own Cold War. Clive, the importer with the fragrant past and the not-so-fragrant warehouse. And Maxime Durant, whose name just happened to be on the lease where a dead man floated face down in designer eau de corpse. Fritz smiled faintly as he chopped parsley. "You sound like the man reading the menu aloud to himself." "I'm hungry for answers," I said. "And Wolfe's gone vegetarian." The intercom buzzed like the voice of judgment. Wolfe's voice, dry as old toast, crackled through. "Archie, bring your notebook. I am ready to speak." I winked at Fritz and pushed to my feet. "The jungle speaks." And just like that, the jungle had something to say. I wasn't sure if it would be a roar or a whisper, but it would be Wolfe. Wolfe was seated at his desk when I entered, glowering at nothing in particular, save for a wilted blossom he'd set aside like a suspect in a lineup. He gestured toward my chair. "You have noted, I presume, the central paradox?" "I've noted a lot of paradoxes," I said, opening my notebook. "We've got a murder, a warehouse lease that points at Durant, and enough perfume to scent half of Paris." He leaned forward. "The scent, Archie. Not its presence, but its resurrection. Celeste's proprietary blend, the lilac accord." I blinked. "So you think the killer didn't just find it lying around? They brought it back deliberately?" "Precisely. Celeste was dead. The compound, allegedly lost. Only 2 people knew the formula and would recognize its presence as significant." I flipped back through my notes. "Celeste and Tibbets?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "Dr. Leonard Tibbets, whose tremulous hands betray not merely age, but fear. And someone else, someone with wartime knowledge and motive to ensure certain truths remained buried. Permanently." He stood, something he did only when he needed gravity to assist his argument. This was not a crime of passion, it was a strategic maneuver. The perfume was bait, not tribute, a signal to the past. I let out a low whistle. So, whoever mixed that scent wasn't honoring Celeste, they were summoning her ghost. "And when the ghost walked," Wolfe said coldly, "someone made sure it walked straight into a trap." The silence that followed wasn't just thoughtful, it was final. Wolfe had moved past the fog and into clarity, and that meant, at long last, It was time to gather the players. Wolfe didn't lower the boom so much as place it, with the precision of a man setting a trap for a particularly elusive wasp. Celeste, he said, was not the intended target. She was the inevitable consequence. I tilted my head. You think someone set out to silence the past, but Celeste got there first? He nodded. The compound was thought extinct. Then, curiously, she receives a letter laced with it. A lure, not a warning. I considered it. And whoever sent it knew she'd sniff it out, literally. Indeed. That is why Clive Merrow's activities matter. His import business is a veil, beneath which a wartime operation has continued. The scent was not resurrected as nostalgia. It was a signal to draw out anyone who might recognize it. Like Tibbets, I said, or Edward Odell, or even Maxime Durant, Wolfe added. Though his lawsuit may have been a convenient distraction rather than cause, I paced to the bookshelf. So, the killer mixes up a bottle of ghostly lilac, sends it to Celeste, then starts eliminating the witnesses once they come sniffing. Wolfe raised a finger. The plan was elegant, yes, but flawed. Celeste was never meant to receive the scent directly. That miscalculation undid the killer. She recognized it too soon, and acted. And paid for it. Wolfe exhaled through his nose, a rare show of weariness. Now we must force the killer's hand, with fragrance, irony, and subtlety. Your 3 food groups, I quipped. He didn't dignify that with a response. Instead, he reached for the intercom. Fritz, prepare refreshments. Mr. Goodwin has invitations to deliver. 4 guests, informal gathering, legal pretense. And the bait? I asked. Wolfe smiled thinly. 1 orchid and a bottle of perfume. There's a special kind of joy in calling a suspect and hearing the wariness creep in before you've even said why. It's like watching a poker player realize he's down to his last chip and the house has mirrors. First was Clive Merrow, who tried to sound breezy until I mentioned Wolfe's name. Then came Yvette, who sobbed delicately and asked if she should bring canapes. I told her to bring herself in a clear conscience, if she could find one. Tibbets was reluctant, but didn't say no. His voice shook like a wet dog in a freezer. And Durant, suave as ever, said he would be delighted, which in French probably translates to trapped like a rat. The hook was baited. Wolfe had me tell them we'd discovered legal documents tied to Celeste's estate, settlements regarding her fragrance rights. A tidy fiction, but enough to lure the scent hounds. Before the first doorbell rang, Wolfe had arranged the chairs, the lighting, and the single white orchid on the table, as if staging a play where no one knew their lines except him. I placed the unlabeled perfume bottle front and center. Wouldn't this be more effective with actual weapons? I asked. Wolfe arched a brow. What sharper instrument than guilt, Mr. Goodwin? Fair enough. The guests were arriving. The parlor was set. And the scent of something wicked lingered in the air, floral, delicate, and deadly. Next up, the confession, or the explosion. If you've ever doubted Nero Wolfe's theatrical flair, you've never seen him arrange a living room like its opening night at the Met. Of course, I did the actual lifting. Wolfe wouldn't shift a footstool without a formal objection, but the design, all him. We were staging Act 3 of what I'd been calling the case of the fragrant corpse, and Wolfe was the director, playwright, and critic rolled into one. My job was to place the chairs at precise angles, 4 for the guests, 1 for me, and Wolfe's oversized throne behind the desk. Center stage, a small frosted glass bottle resting on a velvet blotter like it had wandered in from a perfume counter and stayed for the drama. That bottle, Wolfe said, nodding toward it, must be illuminated but not spotlighted. It must suggest innocence. Like a rabbit in a butcher's window, I muttered, adjusting the lamp. Fritz hovered with a tray of brandy, but Wolfe waved him off. After, he said, if there's cause. If? I said, eyebrows doing the heavy lifting. Archie, he said. If you would kindly seat the audience when they arrive, with discretion. Discretion in this case meant gauging who sat closest to the exit. Always a good litmus test for guilt. When the doorbell rang and the first coat was shrugged off, I knew the show had begun. Clive Merrow came first, face smooth, but hands twitchy. Tibbets looked like he'd swallowed ice. Durant oozed calm. And Yvette? She wore black gloves and perfume. I took my seat. Wolfe leaned back, hands templed, eyes hooded. Let the farce begin, he said. And for once, I agreed with him. Wolfe didn't clear his throat. He didn't need to. The room quieted under his gaze like a classroom facing its least forgiving professor. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, I do not accuse. I elucidate. Durant smiled faintly. Tibbets coughed. Yvette folded her gloved hands over her lap. Clive crossed his legs and tried to appear bored. We are not here to discuss Celeste Talbot as she was, Wolfe continued, but rather what she represented. An idea, a ghost with a scent. He gestured to the bottle on the desk. This was her legacy, not beauty, not bitterness, but chemistry. The lilac accord, as formulated by Celeste and Gianni, was a wartime artifact, a weapon of identity, a signal between spies or lovers or victims. He paused, letting the silence bloom. During the war, scents were coded, smuggled, stolen. Clive Merrow knows this. So does Mr. Durant. And one of you resurrected that formula, not for homage, but for murder. Clive's leg twitched. Yvette did not blink. Celeste recognized the formula when it arrived. That was not expected. Her killer did not account for memory being strongest not in the mind, but in the nose. His voice dropped. A trace note. Lilac. Slightly sour. Perfectly exact. He touched the bottle. No one breathed. Tonight, you are not suspects. You are participants in history, in reconstruction. I felt the room constrict. Wolfe wasn't accusing yet, but oh, he was circling. You will forgive, Wolfe said, my unwillingness to believe in coincidence. Murder, though often messy, is rarely improvised. He gestured toward Clive. Your warehouse lease, Mr. Merrow, expired 2 years ago, but you maintained access. Why? Clive stiffened. Storage. Leftovers from the war. Leftovers? Wolfe lifted a brow. Like an unregistered vat full of chemicals. Clive opened his mouth, thought better, closed it. Wolfe turned to Durant. You sued Celeste over the rights to the scent, yet you did not challenge the formula's revival when it reappeared. Durant shrugged. I thought it was an imitation, a tribute, perhaps. And Tibbets, Wolfe said, voice softening, you knew the scent instantly. You reacted not as a man surprised, but as one reminded. Tibbets looked like a wax figure in the wrong temperature. Wolfe tapped the desk. Here is the sequence. Someone revives the formula to bait a reaction. Celeste receives it and acts, too quickly. She visits the warehouse, confronts someone, that someone panics. He nodded once. Gianni Ruspoli arrives days later, realizes the formula has been reconstituted. Perhaps he suspects who did it. But it's too late. He is silenced. My stomach turned. Wolfe's tone was calm as algebra. Edward Odell, the reporter, stumbles in. He starts connecting the dots. He is silenced. And now, Wolfe said, we sit. The bottle returns. The bait is fresh. But the hand that mixed it is still gloved. Everyone turned slightly toward Yvette. She hadn't moved a muscle. Not one. Wolfe's gaze flicked to me, then back. But not for long. Wolfe stood, an event worth noting in the calendar of events, walked to the desk and lightly rested a finger on the bottle. It is, I assure you, he said, harmless, a decoy, a fiction, though its origin is not. He looked around the room. There is no need to be afraid of it, unless, of course, it feels familiar to your hand. The silence sharpened. Wolfe stepped back. I am curious which of you is drawn to it. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then, as if propelled by gravity or guilt, Yvette Dulac leaned forward. Her hand floated to the bottle. The glove was smooth, precise, but it hovered a second too long before her fingers touched glass. Wolfe nodded. You knew exactly how to reach for it. Yvette's lip twitched. I merely... You reached for it as you did the night you prepared it. You used gloves then, too. You always do. Your prints are never on the things that matter. Clive turned sharply. You... Yvette stood, suddenly fierce. Celeste betrayed him. She left Gianni for the money, for Durant's fame. Her voice cracked. I tried to protect what was his legacy. She wanted to sell it. Edward was going to publish. I couldn't let them... Wolfe raised a hand. There it is, he said. Not vengeance. Preservation. Yvette's hand trembled. The bottle tipped slightly, then stopped. I didn't want Gianni to die, she whispered. I only meant to... But intent and outcome rarely shake hands. Kramer emerged from the shadow near the hall. I'll take it from here, and I'll tell you. Wolfe didn't gloat. He just looked at that bottle and said, Brandy, Archie. And I poured it, because sometimes that's justice in this house. For a moment, the air in the room was perfumed with silence and tension. Yvette stood with one gloved hand still ghosting the bottle, eyes darting like a cornered animal's. She wasn't fleeing, not yet, but the calculation was there. You could see the mental gears trying to spin their way out of a locked box. I don't know what you mean, she said, her voice smooth as cold cream. I was merely curious. Is that a crime? Wolfe's lips parted slightly. Curiosity, madam, is rarely fatal. Your actions, however, were not mere curiosity. Her jaw tightened. I didn't kill her. I never said you did, Wolfe replied. But the glove betrayed your comfort with the mechanism, and your tongue now betrays your panic. She turned toward me, trying on a new face, helplessness. This is ridiculous. Oh, it's got ridges, I said. But it's far from ridiculous. The room held its breath. Then Yvette's mask cracked. Not a full collapse, just a fine fracture. Enough to let the vinegar in. She wasn't worthy, she spat. Celeste didn't even understand what she had. She was going to sell it, to the Americans, to anyone who waved a check. Her voice rose, laced with something that smelled like pride, and something that burned like regret. Gianni bled for that formula. I watched him starve in Milan while she lounged in Paris, and when he died, I swore no one would profit from his work but someone who understood it. Wolfe folded his hands. So you became judge, executioner, and guardian of his scent. She laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. Yes, because someone had to. And that, I thought, was confession by perfume. Violet for mourning, vinegar for truth. We heard him before we saw him. A bark, a thud, and a muttered curse as Kramer collided with the umbrella stand. Fritz winced in the hallway. I didn't. Kramer burst into the room like a short-tempered windstorm with a badge. All right, Wolfe, where's the fire? I got a call from the DA's office, something about new evidence. You can't just... He stopped mid-rant, clocking the line up. Yvette was still standing, face pale and trembling. Clive was chewing his thumb. Durant had gone quiet, which for him was practically a seizure. Wolfe didn't even turn. Inspector, do take a seat. The performance is nearing its denouement. I'm not here for theatre, Kramer growled. No, Wolfe said mildly. You're here for murder, or rather, to receive its confession. Miss Dulac, would you care to repeat what you just admitted? Yvette, now thoroughly unravelled, looked at Kramer as if he might offer her a different stage. But she knew the act was done. I didn't mean to kill Gianni, she said quietly. Celeste, yes, I hated her. But Gianni, I just wanted to scare him. To show him he should have trusted me, not her. Kramer blinked. You poisoned him? It was a mistake. He took the wrong glass. I meant it for her, Wolfe interjected. A mistake, Inspector. Born of intent. She prepared the substance. She chose the target. The act, however, struck another. Kramer sighed. You and your damn words. He turned to me. Is this whole house scented, or is it just me? Mostly you, I said. But there's some lilac left over. He waved a hand. Fine, book her. Wolfe exhaled through his nose. Justice, Inspector, is best served without theatrics. Kramer looked around the room and snorted. Says the man who just staged a Broadway revival in his office. Kramer didn't like it, any of it. Not the confession, not the applause Wolfe awarded himself with his eyebrows, and certainly not my grin. But he was stuck with it, the way a man is stuck with a shoe that pinches and can't. Be returned. Yvette sat wilting in the chair like a plucked lily. She had said her piece. Now she was just waiting for the click of a bracelet and a car ride downtown. Kramer gave her a look that could have peeled varnish. Next time, Wolfe, he grumbled. Try not to waste 2 weeks sniffing flowers before handing me a killer. I do not sniff, Wolfe said, voice like dry gravel. I deduce. Kramer muttered something about semantics and funeral homes. As he made his way toward the door, he gave me the side eye. Don't start polishing your halo, Goodwin. Even a broken clock tells time twice a day. Oh, I'm just glad the clock didn't explode in our faces, I said cheerfully. He paused at the threshold, glanced back at Wolfe, then at me. His grunt wasn't quite a thank you, but it had an upward inflection, which in Kramerese bordered on affectionate. Once he was gone, I turned to Wolfe, stretching my arms like a man who just won a long bet. Well, I said, I'd call that a rap. The crowd goes wild. Archie Goodwin solves another one. Wolfe didn't lift his head from the closed eyes he'd adopted like a monk. Pfoy, your theatrics shame even the press. But admit it, I said, grabbing my notepad. You'd have missed the glove. He didn't answer, which, coming from Wolfe, might as well have been an engraved invitation to smugness. And reader, I RSVP'd. They came in as they always did, like they owned the place, or at least knew it wouldn't bite. Fred Durkin in his usual blazer that had battled rain since '83, and Saul Panzer, buttoned down, shined up, eyes sharper than a fresh razor. Don't get up, Saul said, dropping into the red chair beside Wolfe's desk. I wouldn't dream of it, I said. You two are lucky I let you in without autographs. Fred chuckled, fishing an envelope from his coat pocket. Your guy still won't do Venmo, huh? Cash, I said solemnly, is the soul of trust. Wolfe, now properly vertical in his chair, extended 2 fingers. I handed over the envelope, which vanished beneath a paperweight shaped like Cicero's bust. You performed adequately, Wolfe said. For him, that bordered on rapture. Fred shrugged modestly. The bait worked. She followed Saul halfway to Yonkers. Saul smirked. She even tried to double back through a deli. I got a pastrami sandwich and a tail. Tragic, I said. You suffer for your art. We clinked a few bottles of beer together. Fritz had provided them under protest, something about post-confession hygiene. But it tasted good, and the case was closed, and the dead could rest. You were sharp on the bottle switch, Saul said to me. I saw it. I live to impress, I said. Fred raised his bottle. To the man with the nose. Gentlemen, I replied. Some of us are born sniffers. After the boys left, Wolfe didn't speak for a solid 2 minutes. He just stared at the corner of the office like it had insulted his ancestry. Then he groaned, his signature post-case sigh, and levered himself from the chair with the delicacy of a sloop catching wind. Archie, he said, you may bring the brandy. Not a brandy, the brandy. The special bottle from the side cabinet, aged like a scandal and twice as smooth. I poured 2 glasses, but he held up a finger, 1. I arched an eyebrow, but didn't argue. Fritz had probably threatened him with cholesterol readings again. He took his glass, held it aloft, sniffed like a man appraising the final bouquet of life. To silence, he said. I clinked. We sipped. He closed his eyes. Archie. Sir, there will be no further mention of perfume, war, treachery, or feminine theatrics in this house for the next 72 hours. Fritz will be relieved. He lowered into his chair. Your sarcasm is noted, but I will not be subjected to more fawning over notes of bergamot and grief. Understood. And if that blasted inspector calls again, I'll tell him you're dead. He grunted, only professionally. We sat like that for a moment, the office warm and still, with just a whiff of lilac lingering near the curtain. You did well, he said finally. I blinked. What was that? He waved a hand. Do not make me repeat myself. I didn't. I just let the brandy do the talking. The great Nero Wolfe rose at precisely 7 minutes past 7, not a second earlier, not a second later. That, I had learned, was the hour of imperial withdrawal. He adjusted his vest, clasped his hands behind his back, and turned to me like Caesar leaving the Senate. I am retiring to the plant rooms, he announced. You may inform Fritz I shall not require nourishment before 10. Understood, I said, lounging in the red chair with my second glass of brandy and the sweet aroma of closure hanging like curtain smoke. He shuffled toward the door, pausing only to inspect the orchid calendar I'd had the audacity to hang crooked last month. Archie, he said without turning, this week's Miltonia are unacceptable. I want the heater checked. Yes, Your Excellency. He disappeared into the hallway, leaving behind only the echo of slippered feet and the faintest whiff of vanilla pollen. I turned to Wolfe's empty chair. It always looked bigger when he wasn't in it. More throne than furniture. On the desk, the decoy bottle still stood. I picked it up. Just a bottle. Just a scent. And yet, murder had bloomed from it. Some days the office was a fortress. Some days it was a courtroom. Today, it had been a stage. And Wolfe, the undisputed lead. But the final bow? That belonged to me. Later, as the lights in the brownstone dimmed and Fritz clattered dishes in the far-off kitchen like a polite symphony, I stayed in the office and thought about scent. Perfume, Wolfe once said, is memory liquefied. He was right. The room still smelled faintly of the crime, lilac and betrayal, vanilla and wartime ghosts. And under it all, something sharper. Truth, maybe, or ego. The difference sometimes is a matter of ratios. Gianni had wanted his genius remembered. Yvette had wanted justice, or something like it. Wolfe had wanted logic, and Kramer had wanted a conviction. And me? I'd wanted to see if I still had it. Turns out I did. Funny thing about noses. We think of them as passive, just holes on our face. But they decide more than we think. Who we trust, who we miss, who we suspect. Celeste's death had been a cocktail of all three. And in the end, it hadn't been a lab or a fingerprint or even a witness that solved the case. It had been a glove, and a bottle, and one woman's pride. I stood, stretched, and clicked off the desk lamp. Outside, New York was doing its usual song and dance of sirens and taxis and dogs that thought they were wolves. Inside, the brownstone was quiet, except for the scent. It lingered, stubborn as memory. Maybe Wolfe was right. Maybe scent was memory. But me, I think sometimes, just sometimes, the smell of justice is sweeter than the truth. In the end, it wasn't the science of scent that solved the mystery. It was the fragile thread of human pride, pulled tight across time and memory until it snapped. A bottle on a desk, a gloved hand, and a silence that spoke louder than words. Justice arrived not with sirens, but with a glance, a pause, and a name finally spoken without perfume to hide behind. But justice is never so neat. Tell me, do you believe guilt fades with time, or does it simply change its fragrance? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed the mystery, be sure to like the video, share it with someone who loves detective stories, and subscribe for more. Not every case ends with applause, but the truth, once found, always echoes.